Hello, everybody. Hope you are doing well. I've got Chapter 4 here of Book 2 of the Royal Rangers series, The Red Fox Clan. So let's go ahead and get into it. The closing ceremony of the gathering was always a bittersweet affair. The Rangers and their apprentices gathered for a farewell banquet, with kitchen and serving staff brought in from Castle Redmont and its adjoining village. Now that the gathering was almost over, there was no need to keep the location a secret. It would be moved somewhere else the following year. The Rangers feasted and talked long into the night, until the poignant moment when they joined together to sing their traditional farewell song, Cabin in the Trees. Rangers lived a dangerous, adventurous life, and there was no knowing how many of those assembled here would be present in a year's time. So they mingled and embraced, and wished each other well, and looked deep into one another's eyes, knowing that in some cases this could be the last time they saw their comrades. Gillen had decided to stay for the ceremony, in spite of originally declaring his intention to return immediately to Castle Erlewin in response to Horace's message. "One night won't make any difference," he told Halt, "and Horace will be busy assembling his troops anyway. I'll leave early in the morning." Most of the others followed his example, packing up and leaving camp before dawn. Now that the gathering was over, they were keen to return to their respective fiefs and catch up on events that had transpired while they had been away. Will and Matty, with only a short distance to travel back to Castle Redmont, took their time, staying for a late breakfast and watching the catering staff pack up their wagons and head out. There was something sad about the patches of bare earth where the Rangers had pitched their tents for the past 10 days. Evidence that they had been here, but now were gone. Will looked around the near silent ground. "Goodbyes are always sad," he said to himself, more than to Matty, but she replied anyway. "Mother told me you always felt that way, that when you left, you never looked back." He smiled sadly. "That's true. I could never bear to see who or what I was leaving behind. These days, I tend to look back, in case it's the last time I see the people I'm leaving." He shrugged. "Put it down to my advancing years, I suppose." Matty laughed. "Advancing years indeed. You're in your prime." "It'd be nice to think so," he replied. Then he noticed a figure approaching through the empty tent lines. "Hello. I was wondering if Jenny would drop by." His old wardmate Jenny had been responsible for the catering the night before. Master Chubb, her longtime mentor, had recently retired. In spite of Baron Erold's best efforts, Jenny had resisted all offers to move to Castle Redmont and take over the kitchens there. She was an independent character, and she enjoyed having her own establishment in the village. Instead, she had trained one of her own apprentices to replace Chubb in the castle kitchens. On special occasions, she took over the cooking at Redmont. Baron Erold treasured those occasions, and tried to arrange as many as he could. Will rose to greet her as she came closer. He grunted slightly as he stood, uncoiling his legs, and glanced down at Matty. "See what I mean about advancing years?" he said, feeling slightly envious of the way she rose smoothly to her feet. Even the old injury to her hip didn't seem to bother her most of the time. Then he turned to his old friend. "Morning, Jenny. I'm sorry we didn't have time for a long chat last night." "I was a little busy," Jenny replied. She was a stern and demanding taskmaster to her kitchen staff, and she insisted that the Rangers be provided with only the best food and drink. They had had time for a brief word the previous night, but no more than that. Will looked at her appreciatively. There were a few lines of gray in her blonde hair these days, and her waist might have thickened a little, one of the hazards of being a chef and having a keen appreciation of the fine food she prepared. But she'd always had a rounded figure, and the extra inches looked good on her. "You're as pretty as ever," he said, but she waved the compliment aside. "And you're as grim as a gray old wolf," she said. Whatever became of that fresh-faced boy I grew up with? Weight of responsibility, Will said. After all, now I have this dreadful apprentice to keep in check. Ginny smiled warmly at Mattie. In the early days, when Mattie had first arrived at Redmont, they had got off to a rocky start because of Mattie's haughty suggestion that Ginny address her as Your Highness. But the two were good friends these days. "How are you, Mattie?" she asked. Mattie grinned in return. "I'm fine, Ginny," she said. "Would you like some coffee?" She gestured at the pot sitting in the hot embers at the side of the fire, but Ginny shook her head. "I'll have to keep an eye on my kitchen staff while they pack up. Otherwise, they'll leave my best pots and ladles behind, and I'll have to come back and find them." "Gillen left early this morning," Will said. She nodded. "Yes. He came by early, and we had some time together. Good to see him." She smiled at the memory. Will cocked his head to one side. "So, any chance that you'll be moving your restaurant to Castle Araluen?" But she shook her head firmly. "No. I've suggested that Gillen move his headquarters to Redmont. No reason why he shouldn't, after all." Ginny and Gillen had been an item, as people said, for years now, but their relationship was limited by geography. Ginny had spent years building up her business in Winsley Village, near Castle Redmont, and Gillen was based at Castle Araluen. Will shrugged. "I suppose he thinks he needs to be close by Horace and Evelyn," he pointed out. But Ginny made a derogatory sound at that suggestion. "There are always pigeons to carry messages," she said, "and it's only a couple of days' ride. Less on one of your fabled ranger horses. There's no reason why he couldn't be based here." Will made a defensive gesture with both hands, not wishing to be dragged into that debate. Although he tended to agree with Ginny, Gillen could quite easily work out of Redmont, and he'd be close to his two senior rangers, Halt and Will, if he did so. "I'll leave that to you two to work out," he said. Ginny stepped forward and embraced him. "We'll get there eventually," she said. "Take care of yourself. Gillen tells me that you two are off to the northwest in the next few days." "I am," Will said. "Halt and I want to have a look around up there. Mattie will be heading back to Castle Araluen." He sensed Mattie's quick reaction as she turned to look at him. "I thought I'd be coming with you and Halt," she said. But he shook his head. "Your mother is expecting you back at Araluen," he said firmly. "She hasn't seen you in a year." He noted the stubborn set of her jaw. He knew he'd be in for a long argument. "But why?" Mattie asked for the 15th time. "Why can't I come with you and Halt? I'm a ranger, aren't I?" "Because your mother wants you to visit her," Will told her patiently. "You go home for a vacation every year after the gathering." "So, if I go every year, will it matter if I miss once? Besides, I can come with you and Halt, then go home." "We don't know how long we'll be on the border," Will said. "We could be weeks, even a month." "Oh, come on." "Gillen said they're only vague rumors. Chances are there's nothing to them, and you'll be back in a week or two at most." "No," Will said firmly, hoping that his refusal to discuss the matter further would put an end to their disagreement. But Mattie fell back on old ground. "Why?" she said. "Just tell me why." And that made 16 and 17 times, he thought. He sighed heavily. "Your mother still hasn't forgiven me for recruiting you into the Rangers," he said. She made a dismissive gesture. "That wasn't your fault. Gillen and Halt did that." "Maybe, but I'm the one who trains you, so I'm the one who gets the blame when you keep passing each year." "She doesn't want me to fail, does she?" Mattie asked. "No, not exactly. She's very proud of you. But initially, she thought you would only remain as an apprentice for 1 year, so she wouldn't be totally devastated if you failed and had to go home. As it is, she insists on your coming home for a month each year, and I'm not about to get in the way of that." Mattie thrust her jaw out pugnaciously. "You mean to tell me you're scared of my mother?" she challenged. Will met her gaze very evenly. "You'd better believe it," he told her. Back at the cabin in the woods near Redmont, The two of them began packing their gear for their respective trips. As usual, Will simply crammed his spare clothes and equipment higgledy-piggledy into his saddlebags, shoving them in to make them fit. Maddie carefully unpacked them, folded them neatly, and replaced them in the bags so that they took up half the space they had previously. No need to bother with that, Will told her, and she gave him a long-suffering look. They'll be all crushed and wrinkled when you take them out if I don't, she told him. He shrugged. If I wear them for half an hour, the wrinkles will come out, he said. Then, considering for a moment, he added, well, maybe an hour. Her own packing took considerably longer, as she had to take with her not just her ranger uniform, but also the gowns and dresses and cloaks she would wear as the royal princess. She would change identities halfway to Castle Erluin. Maddie's position as a ranger was kept a strict secret in the kingdom. The rangers knew, of course, but rangers were notoriously tight-lipped. A few others, such as Baron Harold and his wife, were also aware of her activities with the Corps, but the general population was kept in the dark. Her Highness Princess Madeline was, after all, second in line to the throne, and it would be risky for her identity as a ranger to be widely broadcast. There was always the chance that enemies of the kingdom might seek to capture or kill her. As the apprentice, Ranger Maddie, she kept a lower profile and was not in the public eye. Most people thought she was at Castle Redmont, learning the fine arts of diplomacy and hospitality under the careful eye of Lady Sandra. The other person who was privy to the deception was her maid, Ingrid. When Maddie had first arrived for her training, she brought a lady's maid with her, along with a staggering amount of luggage. Will had promptly dispatched the girl, and most of the baggage, back to Castle Erluin, saying that a ranger's apprentice did her own cleaning and clothes mending. In subsequent years, however, they realized that Maddie would need a maid as a traveling companion when she went home at the end of the year, and Ingrid had been given that task. During the year, she stayed at Castle Redmont and worked for Lady Sandra. Then, when Maddie left for home, Ingrid would accompany her. The day they were due to leave, Ingrid arrived from the castle, leading Maddie's Eridan gelding, Sundancer. It would never do for the heir to the throne to be seen riding a shaggy ranger horse. The fine-boned Sundancer was a far more fitting mount for her. Of course, Maddie would ride Bumper until she resumed her identity as a princess. Then the little horse would masquerade as a pack pony. I'm sorry about that, she told Bumper, rubbing his silky nose. I know it's beneath your dignity. Bumper came as near to shrugging as a horse can manage. If you can dress up like a glorified dressmaker's dummy, I suppose I can carry a few parcels. All right, that is the end of Chapter 4. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you guys next time in Chapter 5. God bless and have a good one.